This is Revolutionizing Recruitment with Kathleen Duffy, the art of attracting, acquiring, and retaining talent. Here's Kathleen.
My guest this week is Jeff Harry, and unlike many of my other guests, Jeff isn't a recruiter, nor does he work in HR. But he shows individuals and companies how to tap into their true selves to feel their happiest and most fulfilled, all by playing. Jeff has worked with major brands like Google, Microsoft, and Facebook, and was selected by Bamboo HR as one of the top HR influencers of 2020 to watch. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Well, it's great to have you. As I was learning about you, I noticed or heard several times that one of your favorite quotes is from Howard Thurman. Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive. The world needs more people who have come alive. Tell us why it's your favorite.
I believe it's my favorite because it's play personified. You know, it's when you are doing the thing that you don't really care what other people think about it. It's just who you are when you truly are doing your zone of genius, your flow work, the work that makes you come alive. People gravitate towards that, right? I also say something a lot because companies are like, well, why do we need play? And I always use the quote from Alex Johnson, the future is where people are having the most fun. And if you think about the organizations or the companies that were thriving during the pandemic, they were the ones taking the biggest risks. They were the ones doing the things that make them come most alive. And people want to be around that. Companies, employees want to be around that type of energy. And when you are in a stuck pre-pandemic fixed mindset where you are constantly just forcing yourself upon, organizations and how you recruit, the energy is suffocating.
Mm-hmm. I think it was, I know for our organization, thinking about having fun, we didn't really have to think about that before because there was enough other fun outside of our lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the pandemic hit, and then there was just so much going on from a mental health perspective.
Yeah.
And just that unknown that we began infusing fun, although I didn't really think of it that way. We had a cooking class, like a Zoom cooking class with one of our employees.
Nice.
And learned little things about that. And so it's been really enlightening to think about it from that perspective, because that was, quite honestly, new. You started off wanting to make a living playing with toys, and now you're what's called a positive psychology play coach and a workplace play consultant, specializing in the value of adult play. So I have been recruiting for a gazillion years now. And I have to be honest with you, this is one job that I have never been asked to recruit for. So I'm guessing that you're a pioneer out there in helping organizations infuse this play into work. So tell us how it started.
Yeah, so the Batman origin story, I'll give you the brief version. I saw the movie Big with Tom Hanks back in third grade, and he was playing with toys for a living. And I was like, that could be a job. That's a job. So I started writing toy companies back in third grade, and I just did not stop writing them until I joined the toy industry, I think it was 15 years later. And I don't know if you've ever gotten exactly what you've always wanted, and then been so disappointed when you got there. But, now I was in the toy industry and I was in a cubicle and there was no toys, no fun, no kids, no high fives. It was just a soul sucking place. And it was so disappointing because I was like, this is what I've always dreamed to be. So I remember leaving New York, coming to the Bay Area and bumping into an organization on Craigslist, of all places, teaching kids engineering with Lego. They were basically playing with toys for a living. And I was like, oh, I can do this. And I guess it was paying, $300 a week. And it was part-time. And it was a joke of a job at the beginning, right? Mm-hmm. But I was like, I can make this into something. And I ended up, talking to my boss and being like, hey, I want to make this like a full-time job. I want to make this like a legit organization. And we took it from 7 people to 400 people. It became the largest Lego-inspired STEM organization in the United States. We're teaching about 100,000 kids a year, 1 million kids within, I think, like 10 to 12 years. And I ended up starting to get the attention of some of the companies you mentioned, like Google and Adobe and Apple and organizations like that. And we started running team building events for them because they would ask us, do you do play stuff, like, for both adults, because you've been doing it for kids? And we were like, yeah, of course. But we would just say yes to everything because we had no plan. We had no business plan. We just used play. We recruited people that we thought were fun. We picked cities we thought were fun, and we just followed our curiosity. And it was amazed that you could actually build a business this way, where we were just nerds and we would recruit other nerds. And then became very successful. But I realized while I was running, these team building events for all these top tech companies, I realized that they had not built a lot of psychological safety for their teams to actually play. Even though these were the best companies in the world, they still could do better. So that is when I created Rediscover Your Play and started breaking down stuff like navigating difficult conversations and dismantling toxic masculinity, and how do you get your staff in flow, and how do you deal with your inner critic. And I use positive psychology and play to do it.
So were people like, as you were having these conversations with these organizations, did they even get what psychological safety meant?
No. I mean, they said they did, right? And I think we all think we know it until you actually start to measure it, right? When you ask a leader, when was the last hard conversation you had with your staff? When you have meetings, does your staff speak up? Can they disagree with you? Can they disagree with their boss? When we started asking them questions like that, they're like, oh, I never really thought about that. What is your staff's zone of genius or their flow work? What is their language of appreciation? And they'd be like, oh, I never thought about that. Like, these are the things of like, how much do you actually understand your staff? So then during the pandemic, it got even worse because, a lot of leaders got more disconnected from their employees. That's in many ways why I believe the Great Resignation happened, is because staff weren't understood. Staff didn't feel like they were cared for. Staff felt exploited or undervalued. A lot of this was in the McKinsey report called The Great Attrition. And a lot of organizations didn't understand why people were leaving. They thought they were leaving because they weren't getting paid enough, or, there wasn't enough like mental health days. But it was really a lot about understanding and valuing your staff. And when they realized their leaders did not appreciate them, then they were out.
Sometimes you just step back and you think, I can't believe that you guys were so ignorant to this. I guess, once again, they didn't have to be smart about it because we were all on autopilot. But, I think you're right. It did open the Great Resignation opened our eyes on what we need to do to keep our talent, right? I'm curious, as you have worked with organizations, what are you finding employers starting to do to create this safe place to work culture where they can play? But I guess also, how are they fostering it across the organization?
So the companies, and it's not that many, and this is the part that concerns me, right? The companies that I feel are doing it well are re-looking at how they hire management. What are the skill sets they're hiring, especially middle managers? Because many middle managers got promoted because they were good at the last job. They were good at sales, they were good at marketing, but they weren't good at leading people. So the companies that I've found that are doing a really good job about this are recognizing, okay, what are the skill sets that we are actually measuring in our managers? What are we doing to actually foster a better relationship between staff and leadership? What are we doing about understanding what staff's needs are coming out of this pandemic? Do we need them to be back in the office? Have we justified the reason why they need to be back in the office? Do we care more about their productivity, or do we care more about, feeling like they need to be close to us so we can babysit them, right? And then other companies that I've seen have done a really good job is they're also recognizing what jobs are actually important and what jobs are not. As there was a book that came out a while back called BS Jobs, which found that 45% of jobs currently at many Fortune 500 companies are kind of not relevant. They're not that impactful. And we really have to be rewarding the staff that are actually doing work that is really making an impact, and what work is just busy work. You know, I tell leaders all the time, what meetings can you cut out of your schedule? Stop wasting your staff's time. Before you can even play or incorporate play, you first have to show respect for your staff's time. So whether that's canceling meetings, whether that's having more important one-on-ones with people, whether that's giving them more autonomy to do their work the way they want to do it, those are the steps I feel the leaders that are much more selfless and much more lacking ego are willing to let go of their ego. That's where you start to see companies thriving.
Do you see that based on the size of the organization? You know, I'm a small business, and I have, you know, about 50 employees, and we've grown exponentially over the last 3 years, but we're pretty agile. Am I thinking that I'm just so great because I'm a small business owner that I can do this better than Google or Microsoft? Or is it just that big companies are challenged by all the red tape and bureaucracy that they have in there?
I think it depends on the company, and it also depends on the team, because small teams can constantly change their dynamics. Even if the culture, you know, gears towards a certain level of toxicity, a team can still build a cohesive, value-oriented program that fosters empathy, compassion, and shared humanity for their staff. So overall, it'd probably be much harder for Disney to make a whole shift and all of their team leaders to take the same action. But leaders can lead their team of 5 or 10 or heck, even 15 people in a way that actually fosters bringing out the most vibrant work from their staff. So when I've worked with teams, whether it's a big team or whether it's a big company or a small company, it really is based off of that particular manager, because that is usually the one key factor as to why staff stay or go. It's how their manager actually treats them. And I don't think we realize that enough. And I've been telling this to a lot of companies, you know, as we slowly, you know, venture out or hopefully venture out of this pandemic stage, if you haven't changed any of your approaches to management after so many people have quit, you're just creating a revolving door of more people quitting, especially if they have to come back to the office and they realize like, oh, my manager's toxic. There's so many other jobs out there for me. I really don't need to deal with this. So I think a lot of companies don't realize that this great resignation may continue if they don't actually start to go behind the closet and lift, you know, the dirty laundry and start addressing that.
Yeah. Well, I think you hit the nail on the head a little earlier when you said that organizations need to really relook at how they're hiring their management team, right? And I've talked with other folks on my podcast about, do you hire for skill set or do you hire for experience? That's sort of the $10,000 question, and quite often it varies. But
Right.
I know it's been a change in my personal headset to look at people with a variety of different skills. We've hired a lot of teachers to join our organization, and they have done a phenomenal job of taking that and moving that into the recruiting world. You know, I also wanted to get your read on this concept of the safe place to work culture, if it would vary in an employee-owned company, in that type of a culture.
I mean, it can. Again, it's whether it's, you know, it's whether the actual values are put into action, right? Because there are a lot of organizations that I've worked with where we go back to their mission and values and we're like, well, how are we actually living these values on a day-to-day basis, right? So I know some employee-based organizations that are phenomenal and they listen to their employees a lot. And then others that, it's more of just a facade, right? So we really have to be asking ourselves, how are we living our actual mission and values each and every day in the work that we're doing? And then on top of that, how are we measuring success? Are we measuring success still based off of only quarterly results? Or are we measuring the success of a manager based on how well they can retain employees? How long do their employees actually stay? What is the job satisfaction of their employees? We really have to be looking at new metrics of success that consider much more long-term and are much more employee-centric rather than just numbers focused only, right? Those are still important, but when they're numbers focused only, they do not capture what really great managers are doing.
Yeah, and I was always numbers phobic. And I never really wanted to, have KPIs and things like that because I felt like it was going to send the wrong message. Like, we're only going to celebrate you if you get whatever that goal is, right? And as we have been combining both the numbers in there with the celebratory around, maybe some things are in red and there are other things in green. Well, what are we learning from all of that, and how do we celebrate that? So that's been definitely a conversion for me. One thing I mentioned a little bit about my company being a small business, and and we have grown very, very quickly over the last few years. I have a multi-generational workforce. We have always been a remote workplace, so the pandemic did not make that conversion for us. And I'm really proud that we did an employee engagement survey and my team scored 100% satisfaction. So it's pretty cool. But part of that is that I should say my concern is that we can grow and all that is really fun and exciting, but it can also really mess up your culture too. So we have really made a concerted effort around this, to grow and build team psychological safety. And we use the Enneagram tool to really help us understand the individual types so that we can show up and really be our best. In doing all of that, like I said, it just never really occurred to me to infuse play and really figure out what makes people come most alive. And so when I think about playing, I think about elementary school, and
Right.
you have recess and you get to play, but I don't think that's how you really define play. Is that right?
Yeah, I define play as any joyful act where you forget about time. I consider play like flow. Dr. Csikszentmihalyi used to talk, he's a positive psychologist, and he would speak about how when you're in flow, you are basically, here, let me describe it this way. So on his chart, he has how difficult is a task, and then also on that same chart, how high your skill level is. And when you start a job, the skill level is not very high because you're not very qualified to be there, right? But the work is really challenging. So that causes you a certain level of anxiety. When your skill level is really high because you've been there a really long time, but like the challenge is now gone, that's when you're bored. But between that anxiety and boredom, there is a flow moment or flow place where your skill set meets the challenge perfectly. And that's when you're in your flow work. That's when you're forgetting about time. That's when you're doing your best work. That's when you're doing the work that makes you come most alive. So the question I tell leaders a lot is, what is their staff zone of genius? What is the work that they forget about time most? What is the best way in which they go about recruiting? When they're on the phone, what is it that actually gets them really excited? And how do we cultivate more of that? Because we have found, or studies have found, when staff is doing their flow work, they're 5 times more productive, 500% more productive in all of their work if they start their day by doing their flow work. So the more we can help people identify that, that is really crucial. And then I loved how you used the word celebrating earlier, right? Because I think a lot of times, especially in a remote work environment where you're on the phone a lot trying to recruit a lot of people, you get rejected a lot, and you feel alone. You feel like, oh, am I the only one not doing this job really well? When I run this workshop around playing with your inner critic, it's about identifying, oh, my brain has a negativity bias. Oh, I just need to be aware of those inner critic thoughts because they actually affect my productivity. And the more that I can tap into my inner child, right? The more I can tap into my play, the more motivated I am, the more not only productive I am, but the more clarity I have, and the more I'm driven by my purpose, so I can pick up the phone again and make that next phone call. So that's what I mean when I talk about play, is like, what is the process that we're actually doing, as well as what is the experimental growth mindset approach that we are doing to try new things, such as you recruiting teachers. You're trying these play experiments and just seeing what might play out. And when people feel as if they can actually fail, right? When they can put themselves out there and try many different things, they feel much more like their workplace is safe and they can show up more like themselves.
So are you seeing that organizations are able to adjust work responsibilities so that it allows people to stay in that zone of genius, if you will, and be in the areas that where they're the most excited, and step away from the areas that cause them to have, a pit in their stomach? Are they adjusting responsibilities for that?
Sometimes they are, but I think a majority of the time it's simply looking at the responsibilities you currently have, right? And recognizing, out of all the work that you do, what's the work that you enjoy doing most? Okay, what percentage of time do you do that work? Oh, I love talking to people over the phone. Okay, what percentage of time are you doing that work in comparison to all the paperwork you have to do? Well, right now I'm only doing it 20% of the time. Oh my goodness. How can we help you be on the phone more, connecting with more people, because that's the work that actually makes you come alive. So I think a lot of times it's just simply looking at the responsibilities and recognizing what it is that they enjoy doing, and just tweaking it a little bit, just adding, like, if you just increase it by 5%, which would be like maybe an extra hour or 2 hours a week, that could have an exponential impact. Because on top of the fact that now they're doing more of the work that they love to do, they see that you hear them, right? People want to be seen and heard and appreciated at work, right? That's what keeps them going. And when they see you making that effort to figure out ways in which they can do more of the work that they love, then they start to actually put in more work, because they are like, oh, they understand me and they're watching out for me and they're putting me as a priority.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think that also gets to the real value behind collaborative work teams, collaborative leadership teams, because one of the things I am really not great at is execution. And I have a partner in crime, my vice president of operations, who is really great at that. And that makes us a great team.
Well, if I can comment on that briefly, it's just like, this is why you're a great leader, right? I don't know anything about you except for the fact that you just admitted you know what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. Most leaders in toxic organizations do not know what their weaknesses are, or are not willing to admit their weaknesses. And I think when we approach leadership from a much more humble, compassionate, empathetic place, we create, just right there, we create a safer space for other people to be like, being that you mentioned your weakness, this is my weakness, and then this is my strength. And the more people are willing to share and be open, that is when all of a sudden you're starting to get the best out of people.
I completely agree with you. And I think it's tough because I've always struggled with that, especially as a woman. I was always one of the few women in the room. And with many of the men, I just operated differently, which is a blessing and a curse in some of these situations.
Right.
All right, well, hang on, Jeff. We have to stop here. But coming up in the second part of my conversation with positive psychology play coach, Jeff Harry, Jeff shares how he learned what the next generation of workers are looking for in a job.
I spend a lot of time on TikTok, and I've learned so much about what Gen Z wants in their next job and what they're not willing to tolerate anymore. I mean, a lot of people on TikTok knew about the Great Resignation before it started happening, before people started even reporting it in regular news.
This has been Revolutionizing Recruitment with Kathleen Duffy. To connect with Kathleen or to learn more about recruitment research, go to duffygroup.com.